Okay. Looks like everything works as it should.
Watch out! Pretty cool, huh? A little reward. Yep. Are you ready for this? You asked for it. Noise, be gone. Relax. My aim is true. You tigers are on it! Tiger tornado! Get behind me, Lucia. Don't worry, one swing will do. Why struggle? Rest in peace. Here we go. Leave it to me like a shadow. Now, little cuties, crush them! That's as far as you go. Into the frozen abyss. Perfect timing. You asked for it. Noise, be gone. Let's cool things down. Freeze first, shockwave! Wait incoming! Don't work. As foreshadowed. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. The next page is the ending! Why struggle?
Okay, so if I just have barely enough health, I can do this stuff. Okay, so a bit of news. Now I'm part of Martian team. Now I'm gonna regularly visit Saturday's fights, I guess. I'm gonna use Saturdays to shoot the bow. And that's nice. That's good. And that's really useful. Okay, this 12 minutes say show video on Ozempic. It's literally like a couple days ago. Released a couple days ago.
Semaglutide, the drug famously sold under the brand names like Ozempic and Wegovy, has boomed in popularity in just a handful of years. I'm willing to bet you've heard of it. Semaglutide has been used since 2017 to control type 2 diabetes and was approved for weight loss in people without diabetes in 2021. Since then, it's safe to say it's touched off something of a craze. This is a powerful drug, and a lot of people are using it and seeing great benefits, which I love for them. However, this explosion in usage is starting to show that semaglutide is ridiculously powerful, and not just for the purposes it's approved for. It's not limited limited to doing just one thing inside your body, making it a double-edged sword with both benefits and risks. We're starting to learn what all of those things are, and while some of it is great, some of it is less great. So here are 5 things they're not telling you about semaglutide. Before we get into the first item on our list, what are these drugs everybody's talking about? It's part of a class of drugs, sometimes referred to as GLP-1s. That acronym technically stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, and technically these drugs bind to the same receptor as natural GLP-1, but we'll come back to what that all means in a second. The first GLP-1 drug to receive FDA approval was exenatide in 2005 for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. It's a synthetic, modified version of a molecule found in, of all places, the saliva of Gila monsters. Scientists had observed that these reptiles had relatively stable blood, and they are powerful. Nothing in your body happens in isolation. Taking control of one big process, like blood sugar in the case of these drugs, is going to talk to lots of other processes and make lots of little changes and snowball in ways that we can't always predict, which means taking semaglutide can have a lot of knock-on effects, along with the presumably desired weight loss. Unwanted effects like hair loss, the gaunt appearance of so-called Ozempic face, and even Ozempic feet have made their rounds online. But the drug itself isn't to blame for those headline-grabbing side effects. A fast drop in weight is known to cause visible changes when the skin doesn't keep up with fat loss, and hair is known to fall out in response to inadequate nutrition or rapid weight loss. So instead today, we're going to be talking about actual side effects, some of which are pretty surprising. First up, there's what semaglutide is supposed to do. Humans have many different types of so-called receptors embedded in cell membranes or inside cells. Each type of receptor is like a unique complex switch in an extremely intricate switchboard, and each one responds to the binding of one or more signaling molecules. Anytime you want to start, stop, or change a biological process, signaling molecules and receptors are out there directing traffic. GLP-1 is a signaling molecule naturally produced by the body, mostly in the intestine, in response to eating food. It binds to the corresponding receptors in different parts of the body, influencing processes that govern blood sugar, fat mass, insulin secretion, fullness, and more. GLP-1 drugs basically pretend to be GLP-1, letting us take control of those processes. So here's how that works. Insulin is often compared to a key that unlocks the body's cells, allowing sugar in for energy. People with diabetes may not be able to process sugar adequately on their own. Semaglutide stimulates pancreatic cells to produce insulin far more efficiently than natural human GLP-1, which helps lower blood sugar. Semaglutide also seems highly effective at reducing glucagon, which has the opposite effect of insulin. It raises blood sugar when the cells need more energy. Glucagon levels can be too high in some people with diabetes or higher body fat percentage, allowing too much sugar to hang out in the bloodstream. Semaglutide dials up insulin and reduces glucagon, pulling blood sugar levels down overall. This can protect against the harmful effects of higher blood sugar over time. In the long run, reduced blood sugar levels may lead to reduced conversion of glucose to fat, and this plays one role in the weight loss that occurs with this drug. Blood sugar reduction can also be a mixed bag. Semaglutide and other GLP-1 drugs can cause blood sugar to drop too low, especially when dosage is off or when it's used with other glucose-lowering drugs. Known effects of low blood sugar include cognitive issues and anxiety, which is one reason that doctors closely monitor patients on these drugs. This is also why you should take these drugs under the supervision of a qualified healthcare team and avoid sketchy websites. Some doctors also advise against taking them purely to drop a few pounds for cosmetic reasons. Semaglutide has a lot of effects on how we process and break down our meals, so maybe it's not surprising that it can also affect our actual digestive organs. For one, it slows the movement of the digestive system. One way this happens is through the activation of nerves that reduce smooth muscle contractions in the stomach. Semaglutide also seems to act on the pyloric sphincter, the muscular ring between the stomach and the small intestine, which may play a role in slowing down stomach contents from moving on. This can be helpful. Keeping contents in the stomach for longer means sugar getting into the bloodstream more slowly, but it can also contribute to undesirable side effects. One of these is a condition called gastroparesis, or stomach paralysis. This is reported to be as unpleasant as you would imagine. It's worth noting that diabetes itself is known for causing gastroparesis, so diabetics risk developing it whether or not they use semaglutide. But here's one fun consequence. It could affect you if you need surgery. Anesthesiologists have noticed that slow stomach emptying means stuff could stay in your stomach even if you were very good and followed their instructions on when to stop eating, and that increases the risk of aspiration, or stuff coming back up into your airway from your stomach during an operation. There's disagreement among experts on what to do about this. For a while, major professional organizations in anesthesiology recommended stopping semaglutide 1 to 2 weeks before surgery. Though some have walked this back, many hospitals still require stopping the drug before a scheduled procedure. Even stranger, there have also been reports of unexpected pregnancies leading to so-called Ozempic babies. The cause? Some have hypothesized that slow stomach movement decreases the effectiveness of the birth control pill. There is evidence that delayed gastric emptying may affect the way the body processes processes other drugs, especially those that rely on the speed of digestion or other time-related internal logistics for their efficacy. These include some over-the-counter drugs like Tylenol or prescriptions like certain statins. But it varies from drug to drug. Some medications seem to be processed fine with slower stomach emptying. One small study suggests that birth control pills are among those that should be effective even with the slowed GI movement. Instead, some of these surprise pregnancies could result from an increase in fertility that can come with reduced body fat and blood sugar. More studies are needed to confirm the effects of these drugs on oral contraceptives, though, so some experts, including regulators in the UK, recommend caution in those seeking to avoid pregnancy. So, let's get to some good news to balance out the bad. Semaglutide is well known for blood sugar reduction and weight loss, but it turns out that it may also help keep certain organs healthy, like the heart. People with diabetes have a higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and other dangerous cardiovascular events, and semaglutide has been known to have a protective effect against them. But it can also help people without diabetes. One major trial of over 17,000 patients with existing heart disease and higher body fat found that those taking the drug had a lower incidence of acutely life-threatening heart problems compared to those on a placebo. That one was funded by the drug company, though, so grain of salt. In 2024, the FDA approved Wegovy to reduce the risk of these heart problems in people who may not be diabetic but do have other risk factors. Researchers are still unraveling how semaglutide does this. It could largely be a result of blood sugar control or weight loss, including the reduction of fat around the heart itself and associated health benefits. Scientists are also looking into how the drug may protect the heart beyond just blood sugar and weight loss. For instance, GLP-1s seem to lower molecules associated with inflammation, which is known to increase cardiovascular risk, and also a bunch of other risks. Also a bunch of it's like cancer, heart disease, those are the two big ones. But they're the two big ones. Evidence from mouse studies suggests that it may also reduce what's called heart remodeling. This is basically structural changes to the heart's muscle and blood vessel tissue in response to cumulative damage, which leads to an enlarged heart. An enlarged heart is essentially overcompensating for its inefficiency, also contributing to cardiovascular risk. And then there are potential perks for the brain. Semaglutide seems to improve cognition, protect against nerve-related disorders associated with diabetes, and protect against Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Those are two bad ones. No joke. One 2024 study found a 40 to 70% decrease in risk for a first-time Alzheimer's disease diagnosis in patients with type 2 diabetes taking semaglutide compared to other diabetes meds. Again, scientists suspect several physiological mechanisms are likely at play in the brain. Like in the heart, protection against inflammation in the brain probably plays a role. Evidence also suggests that the drug may improve the function of synapses, which are the structures located between the neurons that enable the transmission of cell signals. Early days for this research, but fantastic if true. Like, we did not mean to make an Alzheimer's drug here, but we may have. For another potential undesirable effect, a large 2024 trial showed that patients on semaglutide are at a higher risk of developing irreversible blindness in one eye due to a halt in blood flow to the optic nerve, again, compared to other treatments. Now, the overall risk of this condition is low. The study also didn't present a higher potential undesirable. Fantastic if true. Like, we did not mean to make an Alzheimer's drug here, but we may have. For another potential undesirable effect, a large 2024 trial showed that patients on semaglutide are at a higher risk of developing irreversible blindness in one eye due to a halt in blood flow to the optic nerve, again, compared to other treatments. Now, the overall risk of this condition is low. The study also didn't present evidence to show a causal link, just a correlation between the use of semaglutide and the increased risk. In addition, some studies suggest that semaglutide increases the risk of diabetic retinopathy. This is a disease of the retina that can develop in patients with diabetes due to cumulative damage to blood vessels inside the eyes. Scientists have observed that the disease is more likely in semaglutide users who experience more rapid drops in blood sugar. There's a noted phenomenon in which this eye condition paradoxically worsens when blood sugar drops quickly before potentially getting better. So vision problems are another case of weighting the risks of taking semaglutide with the risk of not taking it, and that varies widely from person to person. So we've talked about semaglutide's effect on blood, stomach, and GI tract, other organs, eyes. Well, it turns out that semaglutide may directly or indirectly affect your bones. Some studies suggest it could help protect joints and increase bone cell growth. There's conflicting evidence here. Other studies suggest that it could also increase bone loss in certain populations, especially older adults. That could be because bones are always undergoing a natural push and pull, with gain and loss of bone tissue happening in balance with each other. So that balance could be thrown out of whack. Ensuring adequate nutrition and exercise to maintain bone-supporting muscle mass can help keep bones as healthy as possible while taking the drug. Wildly enough, we could keep going, but as is often the case, we have had to boil this down to an abridged list of the effects of semaglutide. All in all, semaglutide is a super powerful drug, and power comes with risk. Like practically any other drug, or like certain other life choices, there's a lot to understand about semaglutide's risks and benefits. It comes down to weighing these pros and cons with the guidance of a dedicated care team and based on each individual's needs and health profile. Ideally, each patient should be empowered with access to nutrition, physical activity, and dedicated doctors to maximize good effects and minimize the not so good.
Life-altering diarrhea. Yeah. It was life-altering. I stopped taking semaglutide. A video called Let's Call about the Bubble. Let's talk about the Bubble by the Plain Bagel. Why am I not subscribed? I think that the videos of this channel were already quite good.
Hey everyone, it's Richard, you're watching The Plain Bagel. It's been about 3 years since ChatGPT first launched, and since that time, we've seen generative AI develop at a remarkable pace. AI images and videos have moved from horrific to near perfect, and large language models have gotten so good that companies have started laying off employees to replace certain workflows with chatbots. But while it certainly feels like we've entered this golden age of artificial intelligence, with some companies even teasing at the prospect of artificial general intelligence, or AI with human-like cognitive abilities, there's been this growing sense that maybe, just maybe, we're actually in a bubble. One Bank of America survey found that 54% of global fund managers believed that we were in a bubble. The International Monetary Fund and Bank of England have warned about the growing risk around soaring valuations. Michael Burry, the investor who famously shorted the housing market before the 2008 financial crisis, just this week announced a short position against key AI companies. And even Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI himself, has admitted that yeah, we're probably in a bubble. And many believe that we're in for a repeat of the dot-com crisis of 2000, given that we have investors throwing money into a new, promising technological revolution, pushing valuations, namely the CAPE ratio, to levels not seen since the dot-com bubble, despite the space not, at the moment anyway, really making any money. OpenAI, who's behind ChatGPT and the video generating Sora platform, was recently valued at $500 billion, despite seeing just over $10 billion in annual revenue and losing even more than that to its expenses. And then there's this monstrosity, which you might have seen circulated in videos like that from Hank Green, that demonstrates the incestuous financial relationships we have in the AI space, with companies like NVIDIA effectively giving money to companies so that they can buy their chips. Now that's a gross oversimplification, but you get the point. The optics aren't great. We're not really beating the bubble allegations. So what's going on? Are we truly in for a dot-com bubble 2.0? Well, to find this answer, we have to go to the source. It's almost as inconclusive as me. Joking aside, at the risk of throwing yet another video into the sea of content on the supposed AI bubble, I did want to address the situation, explain what's going on, why things appear to be frothy, but also to highlight the key differences between the current AI situation and the dot-com bubble of 2000, without falling to the sensationalization that often befalls these type of topics. And to be clear, this is not to discredit the bubble claims or people like Hank Green who are highlighting real issues in the space. It's just to give more details and context so we walk away with a better understanding of what exactly is going on. And to start off, it's probably worth highlighting the key players in the AI space. The first group are the AI chip companies, the businesses who sell the hardware needed to run these AI models. This includes AMD and of course Nvidia, who's absolutely dominated and been incredibly profitable with this AI build out, which has helped skyrocket their market capitalization to a record $5 trillion, making it the largest publicly traded stock. Then there's the infrastructure providers, the data centers, cloud providers, whatever you want to call them. The businesses who buy or rent these chips, build data centers to plug them into, supply electricity, and then ultimately sell the compute of these data centers to AI companies themselves. These businesses include the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, and a number of other companies with at times mixed financials, but a number of key players here do have very strong balance sheets. Then there's the AI companies themselves who buy the compute from these data centers to build, train, and ultimately run their AI models. And here we have a whole mix of companies from a financial standpoint. On the one end of the spectrum, you have firms like Meta, which is a massive company with very good financials that's trying to build its own AI models. There are then hordes of AI startups, with there being over 1,300 companies with valuations over $100 million, and nearly 500 AI unicorns, or companies with valuations of over $1 billion, with notable examples including Anthropic and Elon Musk's xAI. And then of course we have the leader of the space, OpenAI themselves, by far the most successful company in artificial intelligence, and yet one of the biggest money furnaces, with a company targeting revenues of $13 billion and losses of $8.5 billion for 2025. And the company's own estimates, according to one source, see it burning through $115 billion through 2029, with the company even losing money on their highest $200 a month subscription, given that people are using the service more than expected. Now, because OpenAI is a private company, meaning they aren't a publicly traded stock, we have very limited insight into their financial health, but definitely a questionable business model. Most users are melting OpenAI's GPUs as free subscribers after all. Yet this hasn't stopped the space from building out aggressively. OpenAI alone has made plans to build out up to an additional 26 gigawatts in data center capacity. And to date, the company has committed to around $1.5 trillion in AI deals. This includes its involvement in Project Stargate, a $500 billion initiative to build out data centers in the US, a $300 billion deal with Oracle to purchase compute power over roughly 5 years, and deals to buy chips from Nvidia and AMD, which the Financial Times forecasts could cost $500 and $300 billion respectively, with these just being some of the many arrangements OpenAI has entered. Now, numbers like these can easily lose their meaning once they get high enough, but it's important to put them into context here. A gigawatt of power, for example, roughly equates to the output of a single nuclear power plant, and would provide enough electricity to power just shy of 900,000 households, according to the Carbon Collective. OpenAI is planning to consume the power of 26 of these simply to run its software. And that's just OpenAI's own investments. McKinsey estimates that data centers themselves and the infrastructure for these companies will need to spend nearly $7 trillion in capital expenditures to meet the demand for AI and traditional IT applications. And while this is a global figure over a 5-year period, to put it into perspective, America's total capital expenditures for 2024 was around $8.3 trillion across all industries. So in effect, we're seeing the AI industry spend a fifth of America's total capital expenditures just in one industry. Needless to say, it's a lot, especially for companies that are losing billions of dollars annually. And so because these companies are planning to spend well beyond their current means, they've naturally needed to call on investors to help fill the gap. And so far, they've risen to the challenge. Venture capitalists have poured a record of nearly $200 billion into AI startups so far this year alone, with over half of total VC investments year to date going into this space. But the cost to build out is only expected to increase. And that's where this concerning kind of circular chart comes into play. You see, the diagram lays out a number of key AI financing deals, and it demonstrates that many are a bit circular in nature. Nvidia, for example, has pledged to invest $100 billion in OpenAI, in return for the company buying its own chips. NVIDIA also invested in CoreWeave, an AI data center that sells compute to OpenAI, and agreed to backstop the company's services if it failed to find customers. AMD supplied OpenAI with warrants for its shares in return for OpenAI buying its AMD chips, with that announcement alone sending AMD's stock higher, which actually helps to pay OpenAI for the whole arrangement. And OpenAI announced a deal to pay $300 billion to Oracle for data center capacity, who naturally is going to turn around and buy chips from NVIDIA for those data centers, who is invested in OpenAI. So you can see it kind of leads to this circle, which has drawn some concerns. And even since this chart has been published, we've seen even further deals announced, including OpenAI's $250 billion deal with Microsoft's Azure, with Microsoft being a major shareholder in OpenAI, and the company's $38 billion deal with Amazon's AWS. And these are just some examples. OpenAI isn't even the only company involved in these sort of circular deals. But at the center of a lot of these deals has been NVIDIA, the one who so far has profited the most from the AI gold rush. It seems like they're investing that dragon's hoard in any AI company that pops its head up, with there being recent announcements around investments in Intel, Nscale, Wave, and even Nokia, which I'm guessing they're looking to make their chips indestructible, which actually could be a smart move. But it's led to concerns that the so-called pick and shovel seller is actually just paying gold miners to buy its picks and shovels and effectively propping up the space. Now, to be clear, the arrows in this chart aren't dollar for dollar arrangements, so the circle analogy isn't a perfect one. But it could mean that NVIDIA is overstating its profits. After all, if you're investing in your customers to give them the cash they need to buy your chips, then you're effectively selling your products at a discount without recognizing the hit to your profit margin, since investments aren't factored into the margin calculation. And someone pointed out that this type of vendor financing became very popular with companies like Nortel towards the end of the dot-com bubble. Not to mention that with us seeing AI companies starting to borrow billions of dollars to buy these chips and even putting their current chips up for collateral for some of these loans, it's led to, again, this concern of this propping up of demand beyond what's sustainable. And amid this massive build out and the deals being made in the space, there's a question about whether there will actually be enough demand from end users to justify all these investments. Bain & Company, for example, estimates that AI companies will need $2 trillion in annual revenue by 2030 to be profitable, which, as noted by the Wall Street Journal, is more than the 2024 revenue of Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, and NVIDIA combined, and 5 times more than the entire software as a service market. And there just doesn't seem to be a path towards that type of profitability. Yes, 88% of companies are using AI in their workflows to some capacity. And OpenAI itself has seen remarkable user growth. You might remember that ChatGPT broke records in terms of being the fastest growing app, and the company now boasts 800 million weekly active users. But only up to 6% of these users are estimated to be paying for this service. And the majority of companies using AI, around 61% according to McKinsey, currently don't see an enterprise impact on earnings before interest and taxes. And Citigroup earlier this year estimated that AI revenue would only reach $43 billion in 2025 and $780 billion by 2030, which still represents pretty remarkable growth at 80% a year, but it's less than half of what Bain estimated would be needed for the industry to break even. And that's all assuming the AI companies are able to deliver on what they're promising. There's also the question of the bottlenecks we're seeing form in the space, with the key one being electricity. Building out grid infrastructure takes years of planning and development, and that's assuming you get through all the regulatory hurdles of bringing online more fossil fuel or even renewable plants, which don't always provide the consistent electricity needed for data centers. And while nuclear power plants have been a popular choice for data center powering, in the US, the NRC application review process can take 5 years alone to complete, with construction often taking another 5 or more years, according to the US EIA's own website, which might be longer than these companies are able to woo investors. It's even led to some companies like xAI skirting regulations to set up on-site generators to try and meet their electricity demand. Then there's a consideration around the lifetime of the data center hardware itself. Over the last few years, large tech firms have been expanding the assumed lifetime of its servers, spreading out their accounting costs over a 4 to 6 year period, whereas some have argued that with NVIDIA releasing updated, faster chips every year, the amount of time before these chips have to be replaced is actually much shorter, which means that many of these companies are going to run into higher replacement costs than they're disclosing to investors. And when you throw in the sheer scale and concentration of the AI industry, with 35 to 36 companies accounting for 99% of all AI token spending, 2 companies buy nearly 40% of NVIDIA's chips, and 10 companies, most of which are involved with AI, accounting for 40% of the S&P 500, the failure of any one of these companies could lead to fairly big shockwaves, not just in the space, but even the markets as a whole. Not to mention the real estate, utility companies, and financing firms all involved in the industry. And OpenAI alone has a lot of the market's weight seemingly on its shoulders at the moment. OpenAI's deal announcements have added hundreds of billions of dollars to the market value of companies like Broadcom, Nvidia, and AMD. If we see a pullback in that company, it's going to hurt valuations for many of these businesses, especially when you consider how expensive many of these companies have become, with investors pricing these stocks for perfection, leaving very little room for disappointing results. So yeah, it's easy to see where the comparison with the dot-com bubble comes from. In fact, if you lump in software, computers, and peripheral equipment, and other information processing equipment, the current private domestic investment in IT as a percentage of GDP is back where it was during the dot-com bubble. And what's important is that you can still see losses in the market even if the technology proves to be promising. The internet did of course revolutionize our lives, but also led to an 80% collapse of the NASDAQ over 2.5 years, as thousands of shaky dot-com startups convinced investors that they were on the frontier of a new highly profitable business that ultimately would only actually benefit a few players. So it brings us back to the question, are we truly in for a dot-com 2.0? Well, while there are of course parallels with a new technology, investor enthusiasm, and concerns that things are overvalued, there are also a number of key differences that make for a very different setup here. For one, there's valuations. Yes, the CAPE ratio, a commonly cited measure of stock market valuations, is fast approaching the highs we saw during the dot-com bubble, with the cyclically adjusted PE ratio measuring the difference between a stock's price and how much money the company is actually earning. So how much investors are willing to pay per dollar of earnings per share effectively. However, it's important to note that with the CAPE ratio specifically, it does include smoothing, meaning that the earnings put less weight on any sort of surge in profits we see. If you use a more basic trailing PE ratio for the S&P 500, which only considers earnings over the last 12 months, you can see that the current ratio sits at roughly 30 times, which yes, is still high on a historical basis, but it compares to the dot-com bubble where we reached a high of 46 times. So we aren't yet at the same extended level of valuation. Which brings us to the second point, which is that compared to the dot-com bubble, there's actually strong financials and earnings to back up many of these valuations. Morgan Stanley, for example, has highlighted that S&P 500 companies are generating 3 times the cash flow as a share of their valuations versus what they were generating leading up to 2000. And on a relative basis, there are nearly half as many unprofitable technology companies when compared to 2000, when 36% of tech companies were losing money. Now, this doesn't account for private companies like OpenAI or Anthropic, which are highly unprofitable, but these startups have the backing of companies that are highly profitable and are generally viewed as financial strongholds. Many of these big tech companies have very little debt and hordes of cash on hand that they've accumulated over the decade. So there is some evidence that leverage is slowly creeping up in the space, which could lead to some problems if that continues. Currently, a lot of the spending has been backed by cash on hand or cash flows from these large companies, which does limit the fallout if we see one of these investments not ultimately pan out. I also want to highlight a few considerations when it comes to the circular dealings in the AI space. And this is not to really defend these companies or argue that there's not something, kind of prop uppy going on here. But when it comes to NVIDIA specifically, it kind of makes sense that this is the approach they're taking. Companies like NVIDIA are making so much money that it can be difficult to find places to park that capital without dragging down the company's performance. So it kind of makes sense that NVIDIA would invest in the ecosystem that will ultimately benefit its future demand. If the companies it invests in are able to succeed with that investment, then that means that they are effectively incubating a future customer. It's also not where most of their cash flows are coming from. The company over the last 12 months made $77 billion in operating cash flow and paid out $24 billion in investing cash flow, of which a fraction would be this sort of vendor financing. And while there are larger financing deals set up with OpenAI for the future, for example, it's important to note that many of these arrangements are performance-based, which makes sense given that there is this perception that OpenAI may be faking it till it makes it, that it's kind of talking out of its ass with with these large deals that it's making, given again just the scale of these deals relative to its current revenues. But the point is, Nvidia isn't just writing blank checks, with, according to Bank of America, vendor financing only representing a fraction of current AI spending. It's also worth noting that bubbles don't tend to just pop on their own, and part of the reason we saw the dot-com bubble deflate was actually fairly rampant fraud in the space. Many large companies were discovered to have been cooking their books to meet higher and higher investor expectations. And well, yes, fraud is certainly possible today, but we have seen reporting standards improve since the 2000 dot-com bubble because of these crises. We're also in a very different economic environment, for better or for worse, mind you, with rising interest rates often being cited as a factor that killed the dot-com bubble, whereas currently we have the Federal Reserve seemingly putting rates on a downwards trajectory. And with all this, it's important to acknowledge that we could very well see OpenAI's profits scale from here. Again, as a private company, we don't get much of an insight into the firm's financials, but with the company launching new services and many businesses looking to lay off employees to integrate more AI into their workflows, there is a chance the company is able to build its revenue. In fact, just as I was finishing up this video, it came out that Sam Altman expects the company to reach $20 billion in run rate revenue for 2025 and hundreds of billions by 2030, albeit they're still expected to be unprofitable in the near term. Now, I don't know if that's how things are going to play out, but companies who invest in firms like OpenAI do get more insight than we have from the outside. And yes, companies make bad investments sometimes. We aren't today living in the metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg desperately hoped we would be. But assuming that all these players are being perfectly irrational is just as dangerous as assuming that they're all being perfectly rational. Now, with all that being said, I do think there's a bubble of some sort. To be clear, this is not to downplay the very lofty valuations we have, the risk of a correction here. It's just to try and distinguish between a crisis and markets being disappointed with how certain investments play out. It is true that with high valuations, there's little room for error, and that leads to lower expected returns for investors. It's also true that the current investment activity is just blatantly unsustainable when you consider all the AI activity going on. We're also seeing many big tech companies lay off employees, which some are pointing to as evidence that capital spending and slowing economic performance are impacting operations. And we've seen signs of strain on market liquidity, which just means that investors might be less willing to lend that money to these AI startups in the future. It is also likely that we'll see a consolidation of the space similar to what we saw with the dot-com bubble. The truth is, we just don't have enough demand for 500 AI unicorns. And in fact, there's a lot of good research that highlights that technological revolutions have historically been bad investments on average, given that they tend to lead to this boom and bust in market prices, and the attrition experienced by all the companies throwing their names in the hat has a negative impact on market returns, even if the technology goes on to be successfully adopted. And as companies like Netscape perfectly highlighted during the dot-com bubble, being the market leader during the technology's rollout doesn't guarantee that leadership spot in the future. And if you've never heard of Netscape before, kind of perfectly illustrates the point. But the point is, we just don't know yet. AI is a new technology that could prove very promising and could lead to a lot of profits for these companies. Or demand just might never meet the high expectations that companies like OpenAI ultimately have. We could be in for a Metaverse 2.0. I would think this is probably a little more promising than that, but you get my point. Not to mention that at any point we could have a geopolitical event, a headline, a new development that completely changes what we were expecting to happen. And even if we are ultimately in a bubble, timing such a thing is near impossible. Alan Greenspan, for example, the federal chair at the time, called out the irrational exuberance of dot-com companies back in December of 1996, over 3 years before the bubble would ultimately collapse. And with companies like Meta viewing the risk of underinvesting as higher than the risk of overinvesting, these rallies can ultimately last as long as investors are willing to pile money. Yes, at some point these companies will have to transition from surviving on investor funds to earning customer revenues to funding operations, but how long of a timeline we face until that has to happen remains to be seen. So hopefully you found this video helpful. As always, it's important to take a balanced view. There's just a flurry of variables that make it impossible to predict how things are going to play out. So while you certainly don't want to get caught up in the AI hype and, throwing all your money in Nvidia because you have ChatGPT making Studio Ghibli versions of yourself, it's worth hearing all the arguments. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please do make sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It does help the channel tremendously. Let me know your thoughts on the AI bubble. Do you think things are overhyped at this point, or do you think concerns are overblown? Any and all thoughts welcomed in the comments down below. Thanks again for joining me, and as always, Easy.
Breathe. I've got this. Tiger tornado. Channel. Obliterate form and spirit. Scatter. Thanatos storm. Allow me. Clarity and impurity cycle. Well done, Fufu. Yin and yang. Time. Fall into the endless abyss. Enough is pure life ends here. Don't get careless. I learned from the best. Listen to my roar. Research drawn from countless legends, melodies, and dreams. Breathe. Channel. Swift yet still. As decreed. I won't be hit. Wanna play a game? I'll lend you my claw. Reality and illusion. Thanatos storm. An opening. The weak spot is here. She and mind at one. Gracious strike! Like a shadow! Breathe. Obliterate form and spirit. Release. I'm scary and fierce. Faithful companions, heed my call. Slumber in the middle. Allow me. The moment. Reverse shockwave. Strength and finesse. Evil shall return to dust. Leave it to me! Bring out the fireworks! Take that!
Okay, that's almost 30k. Well, that's one. Anomaly. Attack. Attack.
Only the brave will win. That's me! Take a deep breath. I hear the stage calling my name.
That doesn't look safe.
Leave it to me, Anby. Let my song move everyone.
The faithless are a blight upon this world.
Nice.
Adjusting for wind.
Target locked. Sound strategy. Now you're... It's time. Got you covered.
I'll pierce right through.
Recalibrating.
You're in my sights. This bullet will reach its mark.
Roger that. Loyalty. Get ready.
They're poison.
Now you pay.
Adjusting for wind.
Solid strategy.
Rising tide of destiny.
Right on cue.
Annihilation. Ultra. Futile resistance.
You're in my
I'll pierce right through.
It's time.
Suppressing fire.
Together, we'll compose a miracle. Engaging.
The target's exposed.
The melody is
Soldiers! Fight by my side!
Roger that. Focus. Engaging. He won't back down.
Take the shot.
What you deserve.
Sniper's Creed. One shot, one kill.
Right on cue. Off balance.
Suppressing fire.
Okay. Barely. Barely cleared the 20k required.
glass of nitro fuel? Good day, Lord Phaethon. I would never turn down Lord Phaethon. Vivian is at your command. I got this, Alice! I'll handle it. You're all riddled with flaws. Right time! Strike in an instant. Move with the blade. Clear your mind. Who dares hurt Alice? Pretty dance. Molly. Don't underestimate me. Don't you know? Keep my dress sturdy and you'll pay. Your weakness has been exposed. I see your weakness. Focus on the target. Solid hit. Score one for me. Time for a surprise! Go! You'll regret choosing me as your opponent. It won't hurt. I'll make it quick. It's time to settle this. Your luck's run out! Go, come on! Great time! Oh, for Lord Phaethon! Adjust your breathing. I got this, Alice! Time for a surprise! Strike in an instant. You're all riddled. Who dares get between me and Lord Phaethon? Move with the blade. I see your weakness. Clear your mind. Blink your strikes to score. For the time field name, I will never lose. What's the correct time? Out of my sight. It's too late to back down now.
I would get a bit more. That's fine. I should at least start the snap event. If tomorrow's the last day with it.
How about a little late night adventure? I promise you'll love it.
Need a fortune telling?
12, 12, 11, 11, 11. Sheer damage increased by 10%. I guess that is... the buff I'm after all. One, two, three. One, two, three, four. One, two, three. Because 10% sheer damage. Percent HP, 32%. Okay, that is something for someone. Skills with physical damage. But not that much also. Below 50%. Like special attack damage. Current HP. That is only useful for one mode in this game.
Need a fortune telling? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 6 days. Well, time to get those 600. Nice.
And to complete main quest.
I said I was going to do this last time, and the subject was in the thumbnail, so let's not beat around the bush. What do I think should be done about the defense role in Zenless Zone Zero? I think that they should...
Roll, what is it good for? Dwarf fronts.
Scrap it, bin it, toss it, throw it away. It doesn't have a supported purpose in the current design and direction, and I don't think there's any real need to try and save it. ZZZ's core gameplay has very consistently supported not getting hit in the first place. So survivability and agents built around it are actually working against that design and pretty useless in practice. Since you have the tools you need to not get hit, dying slower isn't actually useful unless you're playing poorly. You don't need a role that only supports playing poorly. Which of course leads to the obvious follow-up: what about the 4 existing defense agents? What do we do with them? Check out just how easy this is. Attack, anomaly, stun, support. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that these characters already work in those roles, needing only minor tweaks to truly fit into their new homes. And to prove that, I'm going to do exactly that. Propose minor changes to each of these characters to help them fit into their new roles. To show how minor the changes needed are, and to keep the possibilities from being endless, I'm limiting my options for these changes with the following rules. I won't touch their existing core design or kit. I won't suggest sweeping changes to mindscapes, and I won't propose any new animations or even abilities, with one small exception. I also think pretty much all of the 1.0 characters badly need updated additional ability conditions, so I'm not going to bring those up either. I'm just assuming they'll be changed, like they did with Ellen. So let's start off with my favorite, Ben Bigger. Right off the bat, Ben gets a boost just from the role change. Even Pridwin finally came around to accepting that Ben wasn't really a support, but being a defense agent means he's in a teeny tiny unused pool when it comes to buff options. Being an attack agent lets Ben benefit from the higher frequency of related attack buffs, and that's now further improved by the new double attack buffs that the devs introduced with Obel Squad in patch 2.2. The next thing I want to change is a bit more niche, but directly related to how I play Ben, how he's designed. That being counter everything Ben. If you counter everything with Ben, something you run into is how his damage is heavily split between both physical and fire. Ben's non-EX special counter, his M2, and his signature weapon all deal large amounts of physical damage. So if you're running Ben with fire damage modifiers or against fire-weak enemies, Ben is actually getting less benefit from his kit than any other fire agent. If we change those 3 attacks to deal fire damage, I think Ben actually gets a healthy boost to his damage output, at least when fire agents are supposed to be at an advantage. Another problem you run into with Counter Everything Ben is Deadly Assault performance points. I have used Ben to 3-star exactly 1 Deadly Assault boss, and I think that was the very first week where regular Pompey appeared with anomaly procs as the performance points. Since I usually run Ben mono fire with Bernice, I had no problem getting my performance points, and I want to say I scored between 15 and 17k damage on my first attempt, an easy win for my Ben team. I have never seen that opportunity again. Ever since, Pompey's been run with either dodge counter or defensive assist performance points. I could technically do those actions while playing Ben. I just don't see the point. The only reason I play Ben is to try and counter everything. If I want to dodge or defensive assist, I've got plenty of other team options that will let me do that. So to help Ben out, and we can drag Caesar into this too, I say we add a line to their counter descriptions. This counts as a defensive assist. That would let Ben and Caesar double down on their shared counter mechanic without needing to lose out on any performance points in the process. The next thing I want to change for Ben is a new ability. I really enjoy Ben's gameplay, so he gets to be the one exception. If you watched my team building video, then you know that I think Ben's pretty weak in the stun window. His core design is built around countering attacks, so when the enemy is stunned, Ben can't do that. Making Ben an attack agent will only make this stun weakness stand out more. My proposed solution is to steal a little bit from Hugo and a little bit from Trigger. No, I'm not going to touch Totalize, that's Hugo's entire identity. But if we steal Hugo's ability to cancel the stun window, and mix it with Trigger's ability to apply stun damage outside of stun, I think we end up with something somewhat unique and beneficial for Ben. Attach it to Ben's chain attack, make it 50% for 10 seconds, and this means Ben now has the ability to cancel stun while still benefiting from the damage multiplier. It's essentially neutral against most enemies, even negative for allies that benefit from an enemy being stunned, so it's certainly not a game-breaking ability to give an A-rank agent. And while this is mostly just to benefit Ben's desire to keep countering, it also provides potential other benefits. The devs have been screwing around with stun damage and the stun duration with new enemies, so this means that this new ability of Ben's might actually benefit other teams in specific fights. Heretic Jester, Assault Bomber, and Defiler all take 25% less stun damage, which now becomes something that Ben can essentially counter, not unlike Chingy or Trigger. Ben does have a 1-pip defensive assist and a team-wide buff, so while I don't consider him good in the wildcard slot, this new ability would be something to consider using him for against certain enemies, especially since he would now also be able to activate double attacker buffs. Just those minor changes, I think, are all a healthy boost to Ben's performance. The final thing I'll add is that we should probably change his signature weapon and M1 damage reduction benefits to something else. Again, survivability just isn't important to ZZZ's gameplay, so these bonuses are almost always useless. Regardless, I leave that up to the devs, since there are simply too many options available to replace those buffs. Moving on, it's time for Seth. He's a bit of an odd duck, since his build is spread across scaling attack, anomaly buildup, and free crits. He sort of already works as an anomaly agent, but he's got that extra bit of crit tacked on there. My idea for improving Seth, well, maintaining this oddity, is to steal from Miyabi. Miyabi scales her anomaly buildup off of her crit rate. What if Seth increased his anomaly proficiency off of his crit damage? I think that would maintain his odd design while sort of pushing him away from a crit build, and by that I mean crit rate, and better solidify him as an anomaly agent. Obviously, the devs would need to balance the scaling so that Seth doesn't end up outshining limited anomaly agents, but I think it would still help him along while maintaining his current design. The next thing I'll suggest for Seth is really just a suggestion for shields in general, so it applies to both Seth and Caesar. First, since we're moving away from survivability, I think it would be a good idea to weaken both Seth's and Caesar's shields. Maybe letting their stats scale their respective buffs instead of the shield strength. This could be neutral with regards to where their current buffs are now, but I think it has two purposes. On a surface level, this just moves the design away from survivability being a desired stat. But I think a better reason would be to give shields their own unique niche. Currently, most buffs last 10 to 30 seconds, shield included. But if you take damage, you lose the shield, and you lose the related buff, which is unique to shields. I say we lean into that design by weakening shields, but improving their duration. 60 seconds, or even permanent. This would give shield buffs their own identity over other buffs, while now emphasizing don't get hit instead of survivability. Play poorly, and while the shield will protect you a little, you'll also be losing the related buff. Anyway, this is relevant to Seth, since you can apply Seth's buff to the full team by using his charged basic attack into a chain attack. That's available now, but not always that significant, since if you're running Seth with 2 anomaly agents, you're not really keeping that second buff active all that much, due to the duration and the infrequent stuns. There's no stunner in this hypothetical team. But if we double the duration of that buff, or even make it permanent until broken, I think that changes this from something you can do with Seth to something you absolutely should do all of the time. Next up, we've got Caesar, and seeing as I've already talked about rethinking how shields work, I really only have one thing for her. Now that she's officially a stun agent, buff that daze multiplier on her ultimate attack. That's it. She's already a decent support and stun agent, even in her current defense role. I feel that currently her biggest weaknesses are that ultimate multiplier and being limited to defense weapons and discs. Making Caesar a stun agent immediately solves the latter issue, so we're really only left with the multiplier. And finally, we've got Pan, and I've picked on Pan plenty in previous videos, so we don't need to say much here. He's already effectively a support agent, so the thing that stands out most with Pan is that he only buffs one unit, kind of like Sokaku, but with less strength and a bit less utility than her. I say we just let Pan buff the whole team and finally address the benefits of sheer force. At some point in my comments, someone brought this up. Sorry, I didn't bother to look up the name while writing this. And I agree, a really simple solution would be to have some percentage of sheer force converted into flat pen, similar to how rupture agents convert attack into sheer force. That wouldn't really affect rupture agents, but would add some utility for the sheer force stat to everyone else. Other than that, Pan's biggest boost probably just comes from switching roles to support. As a support agent, Pan can now run the Moonlight Lullaby disc set, which is nothing to scoff at. So that was a fun little thought experiment. Light Lullaby disc set, which is nothing to scoff at. So that was a fun little thought experiment, but well, what are the chances they'd actually do something like this? Honestly, I do not think that the chance is 0. To me, the biggest hint is that the devs haven't added a new defense agent since 1.2 when Caesar came out. Yes, I know what I've said, but we've covered that. Way back in 1.2, we also got the ambush node fights under Shiyu defense, where survivability was actually a benefit. It let you make more mistakes against the extra aggressive, powerful enemies. They removed those fights when that patch ended. I've mentioned before that I don't agree with that. It seemed a little unnecessary to remove it when nothing replaced it. But I bring it up here since it's possible that as early as that patch, patch 1.2, the devs had already decided that survivability just wasn't important to ZZZ's core gameplay, and that they were no longer going to build into it. In fact, their follow-up event, the Battle Tower, was all about attrition. You really want to take no damage, not less, since damage sticks with you. Caesar got her moment to shine there, but that was a lot less about reducing damage than it was about completely ignoring damage. Because Caesar's shield fully absorbs the damage that breaks it, it's effectively a get-out-of-attrition-free card, not simply a damage reduction. So to me, the fact that the devs haven't circled back to the defense role is maybe a clue that they don't plan to continue it. And in that case, I think it makes a lot more sense to remove it than to just orphan the existing characters. And on top of that, there's still the lingering possibility that the devs do still plan to revisit and buff legacy characters. They hinted at that with the Lost Void gear. They hinted at that with the 2.0 dev talk. They started that when they improved Ellen and just recently Soldier Zero. It hasn't happened yet, and sure, it may never happen, but I do think there's a good reason for it not happening yet. In Season 2, the new characters have been getting more and more versatile in terms of team building. Sure, this is a natural part of game design, as devs push the boundaries and try to keep new characters unique. But still, the expanded utility of characters is giving the devs more options on how they can improve legacy characters. Back in my non-meta team building video, I talked about keywords, and how they help make team building just a little bit more diverse than attack stun support and anomaly disorder. In Season 2, the devs have continued to improve that idea, adding new keywords that directly improve team diversity. We've now got the Rupture agents, which aren't that different from any other attack agent, but since their armor-ignoring design makes armor reduction useless, they essentially box out Nicole, who was almost a universal solution for any team in all of Season 1. This makes room for solution for any team in all of Season 1, who was almost a
Yes. Yes, Nicole.
universal solution for any team in all of Season 1. This makes room for new and alternative supports, for example, Siju Fufu. At the same time, it doesn't exactly cancel Nicole. Not only does she still work on all of the teams she did before, but when the devs start to introduce new enemies with higher defenses, she's still going to be a critical unit when you don't have, or just aren't running, a Rupture agent. In that sense, Rupture is an alternative to Nicole that also increases her value at the same time, just not on the same team. The devs have also fleshed out the Aftershock keyword. Almost all of the new characters have had Aftershock effects, which has greatly improved options for benefiting from Aftershock modifiers. You don't need to commit to an Aftershock-focused team, but at the same time, it's also been getting easier to do just that. Patch 2.2 added Seed and Magus, which introduced building double attacker teams, which immediately created a bunch of new team options. I'd argue that they're both very open-ended agents as long as you're not too hung up on the meta. The second attacker required for Seed's buff is essentially a fill-in-the-blank. And Magus almost isn't even a double attacker character. She's an off-field Aftershock nuke who happens to also be an attack agent. She will absolutely work on a double attacker team, but I currently consider her one of the most versatile units in the game. She gets better with double attacker buffs, she gets better with other Aftershock agents, but she's easily got to be the strongest off-field character, which means you can squeeze her into pretty much wherever you want. I've been using her with Monato and Lighter, which has been fun. I haven't cleared anything endgame with them yet, but I don't have Monato at full strength either. I only have him at M3W1. Writing this, I'm actually thinking that I really need to try Ellen, Lighter, and Orphe as well. Probably not meta, but I bet it still hits like a truck. Which just leaves us with the ugliest word in patch 2.3, Ether Veil. Now, no argument from me, the devs need to hit the brakes on just how much of a DA buff they pack into a single keyword. This first DA buff is easily the worst, most shilly buff they have ever created. Compare it to the Seed buff right next to it, and the difference is night and day. The Seed buff is best with Seed, but still has a lot of utility for any double attacker team, or even just a single electric attack agent. It's certainly restrictive, but it's not as bad as that first buff, which might as well just say, if you have Lucia on the first line. In fact, since I think it works best here instead of tacking it on at the end of this video, which is growing longer and longer as I go, let's do another quick little service announcement. You don't need to wait until the end of patch survey. There is a feedback form you can access from the game's main menu, submitting feedback any day, every day. There's no guarantee the devs are going to listen to you. I did this for the Sheer Force buff back in patch 2.0, and nothing's changed for that yet. But I still believe it's better than just screaming into the void, or YouTube, Reddit, Discord, etc. Now, some quick caveats or reminders because the internet can be a terrible, terrible place.
Add Astra.
Please remain civil when writing your feedback.
Thank you for
Please don't try and flood the system, spamming the same request over and over manually or electronically. And in a similar vein, maybe don't organize a copy-paste campaign with your respective community. The exact same message, repeated word for word, may come across as trying to cheat the system instead of being genuine feedback. The real key is that devs, and also the support staff who have to process feedback before it even reaches the devs, are human beings. If you are being a pain in the ass, the very human response is to resent, ignore, or even actively work against you. Don't ruin legitimate feedback by being a shitty person. Where were we? Oh, right, Ether Veil. It's an ugly word for now, but like Aftershock and like Rupture, I expect we'll see it fleshed out and used in more creative ways before the end of the season. In fact, as a little bonus prediction, I've already said that I expect one of the Angels of Delusion to be an A-rank character. Well, I also think it's a pretty safe bet that that A-rank character will have an Ether Veil effect. It hasn't exactly been timely, but the devs have been using the new A-rank characters to essentially guarantee access to the new keywords. None of that helps us out right now in patch 2.3, but I suspect it'll all buff out in the end. Anyway, that whole rant about keywords was to highlight that by delaying updating the oldest characters, the devs have also been increasing their pool of options, if and when they do update those characters. I still think they might be doing that. In fact, here's a fun question related to my last video. If the devs buff most of the Season 1 characters at the start of Season 3, would they even need to release an onboarding character for new players? Depending on how much they buff those characters, and if they truly update all of the legacy characters, standard, A-rank, all of them, I think that then an onboarding character might not be that useful or important. I think a broad set of character updates alone might be enough advertising and boost for new and returning players. So speaking of that, and because I apparently have no respect for your time, let alone my own, I want to do a little bit more theory crafting, similar to what I started with for the defense agents. I'm going to try and keep it brief by limiting myself to only the characters at the bottom of the Pridwin tier list, the niche characters. Similar rules, I'll try and keep the changes as minor as possible. We already did Ben and Seth, so we can just check them off immediately. Following that, I'm going to start off with the two S-rank characters in this group, who I'm also going to let break my rule of adding a new animation or ability, so let's find out why.
Why does Astrid
First
show
up,
on the calendar?
Grace, who I'm essentially
Well,
just going to
clients,
skip.
of course.
The reason for that is because if Grace does get updated, I fully expect her to have a new ability: drones. When Grace showed up in the first fishing event back in Season 1, she showed up with drones and annoyed Piper with them. And just recently, at the beach resort, Grace provided the drones used for the shooting minigame. A core part of Grace's character is that constructs are her precious children. Currently, she just fights with grenades. It makes perfect sense to me that if Grace gets any update, that she'll get drones, which would then allow her to finally fight beside her children. Next up is, of course, Nekomata. Before we even talk about a new animation, I don't think many people are going to oppose me if I say that Nekomata's M1 needs to become her core skill. I've covered this already, back attacks are the defining feature of her kit, and locking that behind her first Mindscape was a bad call. It's time to fix that. And speaking of back attacks, the final attack of Nekomata's basic attack combo is just weird, right? It has the ability to dash through an enemy, which is good, she wants to be behind them, but it's weak for a combo finisher. It tries to make up for that a little by being repeatable, randomly, up to 2 more times. But not only is this inconsistent, but it actively works against her design if that first dash already put you behind the target. Why would Nekomata ever dash in front of an enemy? So my proposal is that we keep that dash, but instead of it being random, we make it logic-based. If Nekomata is in front of the target at that point in the combo, she'll do the dash attack through them. On the next attack, we can even check again. If the enemy turned around on us, we can repeat it. Ideally, this never happens more than twice. We don't want to end up in an infinite spin situation, but that's something for QA to look out for. I'm not going to get hung up on it. Anyway, here's where a new animation comes in, giving Nekomata a proper high damage combo finisher, which would always be triggered as a back attack. It would also mean skipping the dash altogether if you were already behind the target. The final thing, which I'm just going to mention, is her additional ability. Being linked to assault procs isn't useless, but it also isn't something you're likely building into. It wouldn't surprise me if at one point the devs envisioned running attack and anomaly characters together. Look at the early drive discs in Anton. But that idea clearly never made it out of 1.0. So I do think Nekomata's additional ability should be replaced by something else. Korn is next, and I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Korn has Lost Void gear, so she's already got lots of new options the devs can choose from to build off of. The only change I'm going to suggest, which would increase her utility and her damage, is that I think we should give Korn Defense Shred. I'd keep the value closer to Trigger's signature so she doesn't outshine Nicole, but I think that would add some team utility when running her wild card, which is what I do. And character-wise, I think Defense Shred makes perfect sense for a character that literally shreds her enemies. Anby is another character that I've never actually disliked. I still try and use her with Haramasa as much as I can, and I really like how good she feels with Rina quick swapping into her. But I agree that she's a little weak, which has only been magnified by every single stun agent that followed her. My quick fix for Anby is to change her M2. Getting bonus damage in the stun window is only relevant if you're fully committed to running Anby as a DPS agent. But pretty much everyone running a stun agent is doing that for some other character to use the stun window, not the stunner themselves. So I would gut that and replace it with a stun damage multiplier like Trigger has. I'd also make it a stacking debuff, say 10% up to 3 times, so she doesn't eclipse Trigger, and because it would also reinforce her existing on-field design. You'd need multiple and consistent Thunderbolts to get the full benefit. It's not much, but I suspect that's still a healthy boost for both her as well as the rest of the team, which is the biggest thing she lacks, team support. Second to last is Anton, who I suspect might be the least liked character in the game, at least with respect to gameplay. I don't blame anyone who thinks that. He's really simple without much tech. A blunt weapon you just smash against the wall that is the enemy. But I still really enjoy running him with grace, so I'm going to do what I can to keep his current design intact. The biggest thing that stands out to me with Anton is his additional ability. Not only because of the pretty much unsupported anomaly attack combo, but more importantly, Anton's stats have no effect on this damage. Yep, if you proc shock with Grace, 100% of the damage Anton can deal with his additional ability is determined by Grace's stats. And that's the ideal condition. The floor is the limit when shock is being generated by a non-anomaly agent, or even Anton himself. If Anton has anything going on in his design, it's the idea that he's overcharged. So I don't hate this additional ability. It makes sense that an overcharged Anton is made stronger by a shocked enemy. So I think the least we could do for him is let his electric damage scale this additional damage. And hell, maybe let the rest of his damage bonuses scale it too. Maybe even let this damage crit. By all means, cut what you need to keep it balanced, but this damage clearly needs a boost, and I think it's important for Anton's stats to factor into that boost. Another idea I just had writing this would be stealing a trick from Yidhari. It'd help Anton and his shock partner out quite a bit if Anton's anomaly buildup did not contribute to the damage of the next shock. I don't know exactly how Yidhari's Sugar Burst sparkles are calculated, but I suspect Anton's team would benefit if he wasn't contributing to shock damage, at least while the enemy is already shocked. And finally, I'd want to alter Anton's M4. The crit boost being limited to just the stun window, because when else are you going to use Anton's ultimate, means it doesn't come up much, and Anton needs crit rate for his additional ability, which he doesn't have access to with his signature. I don't swap around my weapons and discs, which is why you've never heard me ask for a loadout system, but I think giving Anton a more consistent and perhaps even larger crit rate boost would help him out. Anyway, my suggestion, consistent with his current design, is to have the crit rate proc with Anton's pile driver attacks, maybe for only like 5 seconds. The idea would be that he'd get essentially 100% uptime with it, as long as you're finishing his basic attack combo. But you'd also maybe need to sneak in a special attack every once in a while if you're doing too many dodge counters, or if you're running the spin cycle with Astra. Oh, and this isn't Anton specific, but a lot of us want it, so it's always worth bringing up again. We could really use more and better buff timers. Anton's signature weapon buff is way too big to be left guessing whether or not it's active or even available. I'm not going to pause the game just to check. Finally, we have Billy, and I'm basically going to skip Billy. I don't play him enough, and I don't want to annoy all of the Billy mains out there, and he's also got Lost Void gear. My one desired change for Billy would be for him to always enter his crouching state from his dash attack. My ADD-addled brain really hates that brief standing pause that exists before you can roll into it. So that was fun, but ultimately meaningless. I certainly wouldn't call any of my proposed character changes predictions, just possibilities at best. Still, I think I can make those possibilities look just a little more likely, if only by contrast. I've got one more change to talk about, which will actually cap off the original intent of discussing the defense role. To start off, a new disclaimer. I seriously doubt the devs will actually make this final change. I somewhat hinted at an idea or a guideline back in my first Season 2 predictions when I was talking about how I didn't think Bell and Wise would become combat agents. I bring that up because I'm introducing the same idea or guideline again. It's often safer to not do a thing than to do that thing poorly. The final change I have to suggest is this. If we scrap the defense roll, because survivability just isn't important to ZZZ's core gameplay, why not also scrap the defense stat? It's a junk stat, and we all know it. Now, HP they've saved. Not just by scaling a roll off of it, like they started with Yidhari, but now they've doubled down with the newest Rupture agents who actually spend and generate health. By deciding that survivability isn't important, the devs were able to look at that health bar as a new resource already baked into the UI. That's just win-win. It isn't even much risk for us players. Because Rupture agents are building up HP, a Rupture agent at 30% is pretty much at the same health as any other agent at like 70%. A low health Rupture agent isn't actually in much immediate danger. In fact, I haven't tried it yet because I'm still working through other challenges, but I'm looking forward to trying out Monato in the original Battle Tower whenever I get around to it. Rupture agents heal so much that they can afford to take hits, at least until the enemies start one-shotting them. I suspect I can probably get quite a bit further than I am now, at only floor 26, when I can afford to keep a few mistakes. Anyway, the defense stat does not have this advantage. Defense is functionally invisible to us players. Get rid of it, and pretty much only two things would happen. First, disc luck would be improved. 3 junk stats would be removed from the pool, and we would all rejoice. Second would be Ben, the only character actually affected by this change. But let's be honest, change Ben to scale off of HP, and he works the exact same, other than needing to change the related scaling. Lucia already does this, it's not a big deal. So if it looks like such a great change, why do I not think it will happen? Well, pulling out the defense stat affects a lot of existing gameplay systems. One mistake in that process, and you've taken a lot of working content and broken it. It might be simple to change, it might not. It all depends on how things are coded. This is what the industry calls technical debt. If something is embedded into too many places, it may not be safe to change because it wasn't designed to support being changed in the first place. In an ideal world, everything would be modifiable and extensible, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world heavily constrained by money and time, which is also money. We generally have to make a number of concessions in order to finish. Perfect is the enemy of actually shipping a product. Total segue here, but this is something I really appreciate a lot about animation, despite having no talent for art myself. Rewatch some of your favorite shows, and try and notice how often characters and scenes are static, especially in anime. Being cheap is certainly a factor, but it's also about picking your battles. Several scenes might suffer so that another can flourish. As a game developer, I have a lot of respect for creative corner cutting. Anyway, back on topic, on top of the technical risk is the PR problem. What do the devs do with all the existing discs with defense on them? I can think of a number of solutions, even just leaving it as it is, and just expecting players to replace all their discs. Which means I can also imagine a lot of loud players complaining loudly regardless of what they did. It's a minefield waiting to go off. Hence, my guideline. It's often safer to not do a thing than to do that thing poorly. Cowardice, sure, but cowardice is a survival trait, and it's free. Which technically ends the defense roll part of this rant. Is anyone still listening? It doesn't matter. I can't tell, so that means there's no harm in tacking on a few more things before I call it quits. This last little bit is going to be about not judging a book by its cover, which will lead into me revealing the faction theme that I think that Krampus has. So, starting this last bit off, I've had a couple of commenters ask about my feelings regarding the Lucia art change. I think it's fine. I preferred the original, but no doubt the devs had their own internal reasons for the change. I do not think it was a reaction, or at least entirely a reaction, to some community's opinion about the first drip marketing. Here's why. First, and easily foremost, the ZZZ development cycle is only 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, with the occasional 7. If you think this is plenty of time for the devs to get everything done, the cynical old man in me wants to ask, have you ever worked a day in your life? Practically everything takes longer than we expect it to complete. Almost nothing is good enough on the first try. Would you agree with me if I said that just the UI for the new game mode, Threshold Simulation, probably took multiple people more than a week to put together? And that was just for the first draft before wider testing or any revisions. Sure, in an ideal world, with the right planning and tools, you could absolutely do it faster, if the original design was perfect. We do not live in an ideal world. Why is any of that relevant to Lucia? Well, we don't know what happened during her development. We do know that at least in the English translation, Yidhari's therapy event at one point talks about sheep, which Lucia reacts to, including Monato talking about eating mutton. We also know that Lucia's EP mentions sheep a few times, but I don't think it ever talks about goats. But Lucia's a goat, right? I'm pretty sure that's correct. Maybe, at one point, she wasn't. Maybe, right up until the drip marketing and the beta, Lucia was a sheep. Counting sheep to go to sleep is a trope, so it actually fits in better with her people being night watchers. Maybe Lucia has the same corset swimsuit pant thing as Yizhuan because at one point she had woolly legs and the high cut helped show them off. And maybe that woolly fur just never quite looked right, or the shaders weren't good enough, or they never solved the clipping issues. Maybe that first bit of drip marketing was the first pass of a redesign when they swapped from lamb to goat, as they were running out of time. And so the updated drip marketing was just an iteration after committing to the design swap. We may never know, but I think it makes a pretty good case for being a teeny bit less dramatic, or at least less enthusiastic, when sharing opinions about early unreleased content. By all means, share opinions and speculation, just ease back up on the gas. It just isn't that big a deal, and it can look pretty foolish in hindsight. It was a hot topic right up until Lucia's demo came out, followed by her EP, at which point I think it's fair to say a lot of people did not care anymore. The cute little goat girl was charming. Sure, I can see the similarities with Yizhuan's outfit, but I also think Lucia has a cute little tail, so I don't care. The point is, maybe let the devs finish cooking before you break out the pitchforks. Which was all an elaborate setup so that I could talk about Dial In. To me, personally, Dial In is a perfect example of my point. When I first saw Dial In, my reaction was essentially Chinese martial artist with a chakram. Nothing I haven't seen before. I've been playing Dynasty Warriors for decades. I'm aware of Sun Shangzhong. But then her drip marketing came out, and I saw the telephone. And she was described as a customer service agent, and I heard her name pronounced as Dial In. Adding in a bit of my personal history, in the past I was trained and worked as a telephone technician, so I had to learn about how phones work and their history. So of course, I'm familiar with what a rotary phone is, and I can't help but assume that Dial In's massive chakram is a subtle allusion to a rotary dial.
Okay. Well, that's going to be it for the stream. Well, midnight. Welcome, thanks for watching.